Let's read this together. Well, I'll read it out loud. You read it along quietly to yourselves. It says, between any two real numbers is another real number. Okay? In other words, if I have 1 and 2, between 1 and 2, what number is between 1 and 2? 1.5. 1.5. Okay, good. You guys get it. So to compare and order real numbers, you can approximate irrational numbers as decimals. Okay? So when we compared the square root of 3 plus 5, and then the 3 plus the square root of 5, those are two separate numbers, and we got to think about that, okay? So let's try to do something. It says here, use a perfect squares to estimate the square roots. In other words, the square root of 3 is between the square root of 1 and the square root of 4. What's the square root of 1? No. 1 times 1 is 1, right? So jot this down. The square root of 1 is equal to 1. Okay? I'm going to have to use a pen because you won't be able to see it on the screen here. So the square root of 1 is 1. Okay? The square root of 1 is 1. And what's the square root of 4? 2. So the square root of 3 is between 1 and 2. Okay? Does that make sense? Now we'll do the same thing for the square root of 5. That's between the square root of 4, which is what? 2. And then, yep, the square root of 9 is 3. So what number, and we can think of this a couple ways. The square root of 3 plus 5 is between 1 plus 5 and 2 plus 5. What's 1 plus 5? 6. Yep, good. And then 2 plus 5 is 7. So it's between 6 and 7. Now, over here we have 3 plus the square root of 5. What's the lowest value for the square root of 5? Well, it would be 2, right? And then, or 3 plus 3. And let me back up. I think you guys are getting lost. Remember, we're looking for the square root of 5. We said that the square root of 5 lives between 2 and 3. So what we're going to do is we're going to say 3 plus the square root of 5 is going to be trapped between 3 plus the lowest that it would be 2, right? That comes from here. And the highest it could be would be 3, but it's between 2 and 3. In other words, what's 3 plus 2? 5. And what's 3 plus 3? 6. You had a hand up. Do you have a question? It's recording. Yeah. I'm recording the screen. I'm not recording the camera. It's okay. I could record the camera, but I want to record other things on the screen. Okay? Anything else? Thank you, though. So now, which one is larger? 6. Well, no, not 6. We have to decide what value is larger. This is between 6 and 7. This one is between 5 and 6. So which one do you think is larger? Yeah, this one is the larger one. And remember, for inequalities, the alligator tries to eat the bigger number, right? You guys ever taught that? Yeah. Or I like to tell students, you always point to the lesser value. Okay? Yes. You're confused? Okay. Well, let's can I get a volunteer to pass out the calculators? Okay. 3 of you three right there. Come grab them and start passing them out. We don't know what the actual values are. Okay? So what we're trying to determine is which one is bigger and which one's smaller. And so the one way that we could do that is just kind of guess where they live. Okay? We're trying to guess what, or approximate what the value is. And we did this in the previous example from the last section. And the way that we do that is we're going to take our calculators and turn our calculators on. And then hit second mode, and then clear that screen out. Okay? Hit second mode. Okay, hit second mode. Yes, you have your hand up. I can't hear what you're saying, but do me a favor, hit second mode. Are you going to help her? Good. Thank you. Okay, come get a different calculator and I'll look at it.
Yeah, I love Mr. Krabs.
Okay, just put it. I'm recording a video. You guys are not on task. I know it's Friday, but we need to settle down. This is the video I'm going to play for the principal when I talk to him about your behavior. Okay? I realize that it's funny that somebody put something goofy like I love Mr. Krabs on the calculator, but we really don't have time to focus on that. Laugh at it and move on. All right, so let's do this. The question is, Mr. Adams, or it's not really a question, it's a statement. It's like, Mr. Adams, I guess I don't get what we're doing. We're trying to figure out if this is bigger or lower, right? Which one is greater or least? Which number is better, bigger, or smaller? Yes. Okay, so I'm going to get to the calculator in a second. I'm going to tell you some things that'll clear everything out. Okay, put your hand down. We're trying to determine which one is the greater of these two values. Okay, but we're trying to do it without a calculator, but I'm going to show you on a calculator so it makes a little more sense. So the first thing that we need to know is, what is the square root of 3 plus 5? Now, the square root of 3 is a number. It's an irrational number, but we don't know what it is yet. So we think to ourselves, the square root of 3, over here on the side, I'm going to say the square root of 1 is equal to 1. The square root of 4, and we're just focusing on the perfect squares. Is 2. The square root of, what's the next number, 9, is 3. Okay? Now, when we look at these, where does the square root of 3 live? Well, it lives right here. The square root of 3 is between these two numbers. So the square root of 3 is actually between 1 and 2. Maybe we think it's 1.5. We don't know, okay? But we know that it's between 1 and 2. So right here, we approximate the square root of 3 by writing these down and thinking to ourselves, it's between the square root of 1, and because 3 lives between 1 and 4. But the actual value of the square root of 1 is 1. That's where this comes from. The actual value of the square root of 4 is 2. Okay? So the square root of 3, write this down, lives between 1 and 2. Okay? Now let's approximate the square root of 5 the exact same way. The square root of 5 lives between the square root of 4 and the square root of 9, because 5 is between 4 and 9, correct? Well, what does
the actual square root of 4? It's actually 2. What is the square root of 9? 3. So the square root of 5 lives between 2 and 3. Okay? So now that we kind of have a guess about where these numbers live, we need to approximate what 3 plus the square root of 5 is and what the square root of 5 plus 3 is. Okay? So the next step is we're trying to figure out what this means. So the square root of 3, remember I said the square root of 3 is between 1 and 2, correct? So that means I can say the square root of 3 is 1 or the square root of 3 is 2. But I've got to add 5 to either one, right? So when I add 5 to 1, I get 6. When I add 5 to 2, I get 7. So what I just did is I said that the square root of 3 plus 5 is between 6 and 7. Turn on your calculators. You're going to have all kinds of stuff on your screen because I use these calculators for all my math classes. All right, you might see something you don't like. There might be something funny. You might be tempted to try other things. But what I want you to do is hit the second button, then hit mode. Okay, and that takes you to this home screen. You may have a bunch of stuff on the screen. What I want you to do is just hit this button that says clear. When you do that, you'll get this on the screen. Okay? Okay? So now what I want to do is let's kind of guess. We said that the square root of 3 lived between what and what? 1 and 3. So hit second, hit the x squared button, and you'll get the square root radical symbol, right? Plug in 3. 1.73. The square root of 3 is an irrational number that's approximately 1.73. Isn't that between 1 and 2? Yeah. So now, if I go back, we said that the square root of 3 is somewhere between 1 and 2. If I take the square root of 3 and add it to 5, I get 1 plus 5 and or 2 plus 5. So the actual, this whole thing is between, in other words, let's write it this way. The square root of 3 plus 5 is between 6 and 7. Go back to your calculator. And what I want you to do is let's figure out the more precise answer. The square root of 3, oops, you got to get out of the square root symbol. So hit the cursor to the right, and that takes you out from under the radical symbol. And then hit plus 5. 6.73. Does that live between 6 and 7? Yeah. So what we did then is we used our calculators to figure out that the square root of 3 lives between 6 and 7. Now, if we repeat that process, we have 3 plus the square root of 5, but the square root of 5, we said the square root of 5 lives between 2 and 3, right? So that means instead of saying 3 plus the square root of 5, we could say 3 plus 2, or 3 plus 3, which gives us between 5 and 6. In other words, the square root of 3, I'm 3 plus the square root of 5 lives between 5 and 6. Okay? We're guessing. We're approximating. We don't know exactly what it is. We'll never know exactly what it is because it's irrational. Okay? So we're saying that this is between 5 and 6. How can I figure out if that's right? Plug it in the calculator. So go to your calculator, and this time you're going to plug in 3 plus the square root of 5. Guess what? It lives between it lives between 5 and 6. It's 5.23. So what we did is, if we come back, what we did is we approximated that this value is between 6 and 7. We actually know now that it's 6.73. We approximated that this is between 5 and 6. We actually know now it's 5.23. And then we had to figure out which one's bigger. Did that help? Okay. So a lot of times when we go over these problems, sometimes I just need to go over it twice. Did you figure out your calculator situation? Yeah, okay. All right, so now we're going to do the same thing, but with different numbers. Let's see if you guys get it. So if 7 plus the square root of 5 is equal to the square root of 5 plus a number, what do you know about the number? So they're saying that, let's write this out, 7 plus the square root of 5 is equal to the square root of 5 plus a number. What do we know about that number? Well, when I write it out that way, remember on our first example, we wrote out some expressions. What do we think n is? If you guys were to guess, what do you think n is? Yeah, let me adjust my thing here a little bit. Yeah, n is probably 7, right? Because that's the only thing that'll work. That was pretty easy, right? Now, how would I know the difference? Well, I could plug that in the calculator and figure out exactly what it is. It said, what are the two numbers closest to the square root of 300? So this is top one, but do you know how we can figure it out? Calculator, but let's do this first. What is 12 squared? Does anybody know? It's 144. Woo. Do you know what 20 squared is? That's 400. So I know that the numbers between 12 squared, right? Well, we want to figure out what it would be close to. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to set up our calculator. And I know, let's do 15 squared. Remember, if you ever want to square anything, just hit this button here and it just puts the little superscript 2. All right? So 15 squared is 225. Whoops. Let's do 16 squared. 16 squared is 256. Are we close to 300 yet? We're getting closer, but maybe we could get even more close. So I think 17 squared is 289. Yeah? That's really close. Let's do 18 squared. 18 squared is 324. So now what that means is we want a number a little bit above and a little bit below. So the square root of 289 would be 17, right? Because 17 squared is equal to 289. 18 squared is equal to, what was that again? 324 was equal to 324. So that means that the square root of 324 is equal to 18. Well, 300, right? The square root of 300 lives between those two numbers, right? It lives between these two numbers, and that means that the square root of 300 is between 17 and 18. Now, somebody got real excited and plugged it in the calculator, which I'm really proud that they did that. And what did you guys get for the actual value? 17 point what? So we'll just approximate to 0.32. Okay? So when you plug the square root of 300 into your calculator, it's approximately 17.32. Okay? We should be writing this down. Right? Everything I have written on my paper, you should have on your paper. Does that make sense? All right. I'm going to stop the video.